not be there for civilian courts. But, all I can say to that is, look, somebody might have seen it and then just remained tight-lipped when it came to actually giving evidence. But most people, I think, unless you're pretty determined, when faced with the seriousness of giving evidence in court, whether it's courts martial or civilian courts, it's a pretty sobering experience. And if you're going to lie, then you're going to not do that lightly, I would suggest.
A texter asks, speaking of civilian courts or a civil court, has this commander paid a higher price in a court-martial, in other words, he's been dismissed from the Defence Force, than he would have paid in a district court, for example, do you think?
I suspect so.
Yes and no. I mean, yes and no. With the district court, they wouldn't have said that his employment would have come to an end. But if you did this in the context of your employment, then I dare say even in a private civilian sector, your employment would have come to an end. So it might not have been wrapped up in the court proceedings quite in such a way as it did with courts martial, because courts martial, of course, if he's lost his position, that's part and parcel of the courts martial process, where it wouldn't be part and parcel of the civilian process. But mirroring the civilian court process would be an employment process that if it was substantiated, then I think everybody would agree that a male anybody groping another person's bottom in the context of a work environment is utterly and completely unacceptable, and they would find themselves on the probably gross misconduct and not able to even return to their desk before they'd be walking down the street, and quite appropriately so.
Do you think there's a chance he might have had continued name suppression if it had gone through a civilian court?
Oh, no.
Yep.
No. Well, there's a chance. An application could have been made. I know, look, name suppression isn't always an easy beat up. It's actually really quite sophisticated. And the context of how much we, either in academia or commentators or the media or the public, have so much heat on the courts as far as name suppression is concerned, then I'm safe, I think, in saying that the judges are acutely aware of that, and when any name suppression application comes before them, they have to make sure it's really watertight, because they know the first thing the media are going to jump on is the issue of name suppression. So, A, I don't think it's automatic. B, an application could have been made, but C, it would have been looked at extremely carefully, and if granted, it would only be where a very clear case was made out by a defendant.
Chris, thank you. Professor Chris Gallivan on the panel, 2 minutes to 5. Bit of politics before we go. Hillary seems to have won Kentucky. The results actually are quite late coming through from these two primaries. Bernie Sanders needed to win big in Kentucky to stay in touch with her. Do you think, both of you, that she is now a shoo-in?
No.
Or do you subscribe to the argument that Bernie will be seen as the better bet for the Democrats and the superdelegates will turn against her like they did last time?
Too soon to say, I think. I know time's running out, but I still think it's too soon to say, and I think that's partly because they're probably a little undecided themselves. I mean, they're not in the complete and utter stew that the Republicans are, but there is doubt and there will be questioning.
Yeah, I think she's obviously pretty concerned, and to say that she wants to bring Bill into the East Wing with her.
I want to ask you about that, yeah.
Yeah, if she becomes the next president is interesting, because she's clambering and trying to get different people involved and to go and get votes, obviously, that she wouldn't normally. And she's, I think she could get in and she will get in, but she's going to do a bit of sweating yet.
What do you think, Chris, about that 2-for-1 deal? She's talking about she's going to put Bill back in charge of revitalising the economy.
Double-edged sword.
Do you think that's a good idea or not?
Maybe she's taking him back in because that is the porch that she can keep him on.
I wonder what the interns would look like. She'd probably have to make them not be long, dark-haired young women.
I think there'll be close scrutinising of the interns this time
round. They'll all look like Donald Trump.
Very good to have both of you on the panel. Sally Windley, always a pleasure.
Thanks, Jim.
And Chris Weekharter, thank you for coming on too.
Pleasure.
So that's us for another day, and coming up, thank you everybody for your company. Coming up, as usual, Checkpoint with John Campbell on the other side of the news and the weather.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell, and on behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us. Tonight, emergency housing. Today, I visited some WINZ approved, WINZ paying for it, but for people who have to repay the money to WINZ, it's pretty small and very basic, and it's up to $1,300 a week. Christchurch police are about to hold a media conference updating their homicide investigation into the death of Renee Duckmanton. We will have the latest from that. Convicted murderer and sex offender Philip John Smith complains his human rights have been breached. Health authorities say an outbreak of the measles that began in Waikato is still spreading. NASA's super balloon, and it really does seem to be super, it left Wanaka yesterday. It's in Australia already, and treasures dating back 1,600 years have been found. But first, here's Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The Finance Minister has put the Auckland Council on notice that the government will step in if it doesn't open up more land for development. An independent panel is drafting a unitary plan for the city by July the 22nd, and the council will then have 4 weeks to accept or reject it. Earlier today, the Labour Party says the government should scrap urban growth boundaries in Auckland. Bill English says now that Labour is on board with easing city limits, there's a parliamentary majority to override any decision made by the council, which he says has so far made poor decisions.
The Auckland Council is on notice, and the fact that Labour and National can agree on what's in the past been a pretty controversial proposition is a strong signal to Auckland Council that central government could step in if it needs to.
Bill English says he cannot see how the council can supply enough houses if it keeps the current urban limits in place. A social housing advocate in New Plymouth says dozens of state houses lie vacant in the city, and he wants to know what Housing New Zealand plans to do with them. In 2008, 28 properties were demolished in the suburb of Marfell, and in 2012, 20 families were moved out to make way for redevelopment. The chairman of Community Housing Action Taranaki, Brian Erickson, says the project was put on ice in 2014 and Discovery Place in particular has been left looking like a ghost town.
To see an empty house like this and thinking that a family could be living here and paying minimal rental and being able to put money into their children it's a bit of a shame.
Brian Erickson says it's time a decision was made on what to do with the area. At the moment, there are 36 applications for social housing in New Plymouth. Housing New Zealand has 66 vacant properties, 20 of which are under repair and 39 for sale. A Navy commander who groped a junior female officer has been dismissed from the Defence Force. Philip Wigg was found guilty at a court-martial yesterday of indecently assaulting the woman at a social event at the Devonport Naval Base in 2012. At a sentencing hearing today, the prosecution asked for him to be demoted to the rank of lieutenant. However, Judge Duncan Harvey told Wigg his actions were a gross failure of leadership and it would be intolerable for his services to be retained. He said Wigg targeted the woman, preyed upon her, humiliated her and made her feel like an outsider among her own colleagues. The family of a 22-year-old woman whose body was found near the Rakaya River on Sunday says she was a beautiful, kind person. The police say the body of Renee Duckmanton was badly burned and they're treating her death as a homicide. In a statement, her mother Tracy says Renee was a kind, sweet and trusting person who loved everyone she interacted with. The police have been at Miss Duckmanton's home in Cashmere today and also at her mother's St Martin's property. The government has pledged more than $6.5 million to the major Canterbury irrigation scheme, Central Plains Water. The money from the Irrigation Acceleration Fund will be used to complete Stage 2 of the scheme, the aim of which is to deliver water to 25,000 hectares of land. Sally Murphy reports.
Stage 1 of the scheme, which covers 60,000 hectares, was turned on last August. Stage 2 got the go-ahead earlier this year after Central Plains Water secured an $8 million loan from the Selwyn District Council for the design. Announcing the new funding today, the Minister of Primary Industries, Nathan Guy, said the water drawn from alpine rivers gives farmers certainty and takes pressure off the groundwater supply. Mr Guy also announced $900,000 of funding for the Sheffield Irrigation Scheme, a subsidiary of Central Plains Water. In Christchurch, Sally Murphy.
A national cinema chain has slashed the price of tickets at its Wellington multiplex by more than a third, from $16 to $10. Reading Cinemas has already made similar price cuts at its Auckland, Napier and Christchurch locations. It says the cuts have been made for a variety of reasons in each place, but has declined to comment further. Statistics New Zealand says the average price of a regular adult cinema ticket in the March quarter was $16.75, up by 8.5% from $15.43 5 years ago. To sport, and heavyweight Joseph Parker is full of confidence about Saturday's International Boxing Federation elimination bout against the vastly more experienced Frenchman Carlos Takam. The winner gets a mandatory challenge against the IBF title holder, Britain's Anthony Joshua. Parker is undefeated in 18 professional fights, while 35-year-old Takam has a record of 33 wins, 2 losses and a draw. However, the 24-year-old New Zealander is unfazed by the experience gap.
I have a goal, and that's to be the world champion, and I'm not going to let anything stand in my way. So come Saturday night, we're ready to do what we have to do, and that's to get the victory.
Joseph Parker. 4 debutants feature in the 14-strong New Zealand men's basketball team named today to travel to Asia to prepare for the Olympic qualifying tournament in July. They're Nelson forward Finn Delaney, Taranaki forward Jordan Ngatai and guard Ethan Rasbach and centre Michael Karena, both from Canterbury. 2 players will be dropped from the squad before the Olympic qualifier in the Philippines. The New Zealand cyclist George Bennett has finished third on the third stage of the Tour of California to move to third overall, 31 seconds off the lead. And Manchester United have beaten Bournemouth 3-1 to secure 5th place in the final English Premier League table that qualifies them for the Europa League next season. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Iran, according to the Marxist activist Yasamine Mather. Why the Islamists, not the leftists, prevailed in 1979. Why she left the country of her birth and what she makes of its recent partial rehabilitation in the eyes of some of the West. That'll go nicely with our overseas correspondent Nita Tuma on the line from Palestine. And we'll wrap it up with a Blue Note edition of the New Jazz Archive on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Squally thunderstorms easing to showers. Northwest gales in exposed places tending westerly this afternoon. Waikato to Whanganui, including the Central High Country, squally thunderstorms easing to isolated showers. Showers becoming frequent and heavier about the coast tomorrow afternoon. Manawatu to Wellington, including Wairarapa, showers becoming isolated and clearing in Wellington and Wairarapa this afternoon. Severe northwest gales in the Tararua district from this evening through to tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, some showers this afternoon, mainly fine tomorrow. Severe northwest gales south of Napier from tonight to tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough and Nelson, showers clearing this afternoon, then mainly fine. Bulla to Fiordland, showers easing tomorrow afternoon, then clearing in Westland and Bulla. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, scattered showers about the south coast, clearing tomorrow afternoon, mainly fine elsewhere. And the Chatham Islands, rain developing tonight, easing to showers tomorrow. It's coming up to 5:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. $190 a night for the most basic room in a very basic lodge. $1,330 a week, that is. That's one example of what WINZ approved emergency housing looks like. And there's more. I'm holding here an official notice of credit from WINZ. It approves payment of $1,750. For 10 nights, it's $165 a night, plus $100 bonds. Another WINZ client getting emergency housing because they can't afford private rent, can't get into a Housing New Zealand home and are in an emergency accommodation that WINZ are paying for now, but they'll have to repay at some stage. They don't have the money. Of course, if they did, they wouldn't need to live like this. Today, a senior ministry source told me there isn't enough housing to cope. If they could provide better and cheaper emergency housing, they quite simply would. But in the meantime, this place in Pakinini, South Auckland, an approved WINZ accommodation provider, and we have the signed paperwork to prove it, is one of the answers to Auckland's housing crisis. Nicole, tell me about this place. How much are you paying to be here?
$190 a night.
So how much is that a week?
$1,330.
And WINZ is paying for that, are they?
Yes. but I have to pay it back to them.
So you're paying $1,330 to stay here for a week.
Yes.
And then what happens?
I'd have to go back in if I don't find anywhere else and apply for another $1,330 again, which is not nice because I can't afford that.
So this is emergency housing and Windsor paying for it, but you have to repay it and it's a week at a time.
Yes, that's what they said.
And where were you before this with your 3 babies?
At home with my parents. But I got kicked out and they wouldn't let us come back, so this is the only place I could find, or else I'd be in my car.
So what are you going to do? Because you can't keep paying $1,330 a week to be here. 1, you don't have the money, and 2, I mean, it's just ridiculous that it's so expensive.
Yes, it is. I'd probably just live in my car out on the street like every other person that has to live in their car that doesn't have a home. Which I don't want to do because I have a newborn, but that's just my last option. I have nowhere else to go. Family are not willing to take me in due to my circumstances, so that's just the way I think I have to live my life and just try find my way.
So this is your emergency housing?
Yes, which is a shame because who can afford that? They should be using the money that they have to pay for new homes for people to live in, instead of making more and more excuses.
Do you mind if I do a tour of your place?
Sure.
So I'm just going to, for people listening on the radio, I'm just going to do a tour. This is the most basic unit you can imagine. For $190 a night, there is a really utilitarian kitchen, really basic. The oven is old. I would guess it's an old shack lock that I remember from my childhood. There's a microwave. There's a very basic fridge. Remember, this is $190 a night. The bathroom is extremely rudimentary. I mean, basically, it couldn't be more basic. And then there is the little living area, and then 1 bedroom that Nicole, I'm going to turn the light on, that Nicole, one of the bulbs doesn't work. That's it. That's the totality of the lighting. There doesn't appear to be any heating in here. There is in the other room, and it's quite cold in Auckland today. So this is $190 a night, $1,300 a week, emergency housing, which Nicole is getting the money from Winds for, but she has to repay. And Nicole isn't alone. In fact, the people directly adjacent to her are also in the same situation. So let's go meet them. This is Unit 4. Hello. Hello. I'm John.
Oh, Rasta.
How are you?
Oh, not too bad, mate.
Nice to meet you. Hello, I'm John.
Hi, Twainy.
Hi, Twainy. Nice to meet you. This is Claire,
Hi.
our camera woman.
Hi.
Hello, what's your name?
Kyle.
Nice to meet you. How are you, bro?
Good.
Good. How come you're in a wheelchair? What's up?
I don't. Mum. He was born like that. Yeah. He's got a condition called cordial regression syndrome. Layman's terms, he didn't form properly in the womb, and just came out like that. Yeah, special.
So there's the 3 of you, right?
Yes, just the 3 of us. Yeah.
Okay. And what are you here like Nicole next door, being paid for by Winds?
Yes, we are.
And what are you paying to be here?
We currently paying work and income have paid $2,400 and something for us to be here for 2 weeks.
So $1,200 a week.
Yes, practically yes.
And so that's just under $200 a night, somewhere in,
Yeah.
okay, just below that.
Yeah, that's right.
And when your emergency accommodation runs out here, where will you go?
Wouldn't have a clue. Absolutely, wouldn't have a clue really.
So where are you now? Obviously you're desperate for a house, right?
Well, apparently we've been told that we are on a priority list now, but that's not to say that we'll be housed within the 2 weeks that we are staying here.
And the money, the $2,400 that you're paying to stay in this incredibly overpriced room, you will have to repay that to Winds, will you?
Definitely, yes. We have to pay it back.
Can you repay it?
No, I don't know.
So that was South Auckland earlier this afternoon, Takanini. There was another Winds client there too, $165 a night. We have the paperwork. There are a number of issues here. The general, why does emergency housing of a very rudimentary standard cost as much as $1,100 to $1,300 a week? Whilst it is emergency housing, obviously, isn't there something cheaper available? And specific issues too. Why is a child in a wheelchair living in circumstances like that? Why are they waiting so long for a Housing New Zealand house? Now, we called Paula Bennett's office. They asked for a privacy waiver so they could discuss specific cases. We scrambled, but we did manage to get one from the second family with the son in the wheelchair. We also have Wynn's own paperwork for one of the families. The Minister's office then said it was an operational matter and declined our invitation to appear. At 4:58, we did receive a statement from the Ministry of Social Development, Social Housing Deputy Chief Executive, Carl Crafer. It's a long statement. I'm not going to read it all, but I will read a big chunk of it. If emergency house places are limited or already at capacity, we have to look at all housing options for people coming to us in need. In some cases, motels or hotels may be all that's available. It's never ideal, and we would much prefer to be working with families well before their housing need becomes that acute. While it may not be the best solution, this is about responding to an urgent need to get a roof over their head in the time that is available to us. There's a number of reasons why we may not be able to go with the cheapest option. People may not have any transport, or they may need to be close to local schools or medical facilities. More affordable options may be booked out. The government has announced that from September, a special needs grant will be available that is dedicated to helping those needing emergency housing. This does not need to be paid back. That's the situation currently. It does need to be repaid and will be payable for up to 7 days while we work with them to investigate alternative housing options. So that statement from the Ministry of Social Development, and once again the Minister declined our invitation to appear. Meanwhile, while people live in cars and garages in Auckland, in New Plymouth, a sizeable part of the suburb of Marfell is a ghost town. And social advocates there want to know why. Dozens of state houses there have remained empty since 2012, when a proposed development for the area was put on hold. Our Taranaki reporter, Robin Martin, has been in Marfell.
Well, look, Marfell has long been a state housing area in New Plymouth. Multiple houses here, some of them built over 60 years ago. Now, in 2008, you can't see it, but just across from me, there's now a wide open space where there were formerly 28 properties that were bowled as brave kind of new plans were evolving for a redevelopment of the area. In 2012, 20 families were moved out of this region, this is in this neighbourhood, and that's why the houses are empty at the moment. So in 2012, 20 families were moved out as part of this proposed redevelopment of the neighbourhood. Then in 2014, suddenly the project was on ice, and now you have something like 20 odd properties here that are empty. Some of them are the two-storey duplexes that you can see behind me, or people will be familiar with them from around the country. There are also units here and standalone houses, and in amongst that are pockets of habitation, believe it or not. I've spoken to one family. Who are marooned amongst all these empty lots.
Well, it's pretty weird because I know of a couple of homeless people myself, and you know, they're saying that Housing New Zealand tries to say to them that there's bugger all available, but then you look around and there's all these empty houses.
Yeah. And what would you like to see happen?
Fill them up with people that need housing. Yeah.
Right, so that's someone who's still living surrounded by empty state houses. Robin, what is the social housing need there at the moment?
Well, according to the Ministry of Social Development's website, there are 35 applications for social housing. They're on the social housing register. Now, the vast majority of those are for 1- and 2-bedroomed places, and that may be part of the problem. You see these 3-bedroom places around us that we're all familiar with. That's why they're empty. Of those 35 odd cases, 21 are considered priority A, so the highest priority for housing. Earlier in the day, I spoke to a social housing advocate from around here, Brian Erickson.
I think it's actually about affordable housing. Like, you know, there's places in New Plymouth that are for rent. There's a lot of demand, but it's about the cost of them, whereas these that Housing New Zealand own could be made affordable to families, young families that can live affordably, and when they go into the private rentals, obviously it makes a big difference. But to see an empty house like this and thinking that a family could be living here and paying minimal rental, and being able to put money into their children is it's a bit of a shame. But really, to find out what they're going to do with it, that's the answer that we'd all like in the community.
That's the Chairman of Community Housing Action Taranaki, Brian Erickson, speaking with our Taranaki reporter, Robin Martin. We've just received a statement from Housing New Zealand. It says it has nearly 1,000 properties in New Plymouth and it's confident it has enough to meet the needs of people on the Ministry of Social Development's Social Housing Register. Last year it says it housed an average of 2 families every week. In regards to the empty homes in Marfell, Housing New Zealand says, and I quote, "Some of them are currently vacant because we have very little demand for them. In addition, given the age and configuration of some of these properties, we've made the decision as a business that it would be uneconomic to upgrade them, to bring them into line with modern standards. We are looking at options for the future of these properties, which could include selling them. We have already sold 2 properties to the New Plymouth District Council to help them improve access to Marfell Park." Coming up, we have the latest on the death of Christchurch woman Renee Duckmanton, whose burnt body was found near Rakaia on Sunday. Our reporter Sally Murphy is at a police media conference that is taking place right now. The moment she can join us, she will. And Otago community's pioneering dream of putting up its own wind farm has been heavily challenged today by the people who live closest to it, and there's no excuse not to go to the movies now. Well, a Wellington cinema anyway has dropped its ticket prices to $10. Where and why, and are people still going to the movies? All of that coming up. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. Text 2101 if you want to text us, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And of course we do have Twitter and Facebook pages. This is breaking news at 5:21. The family of the woman whose body was found near Rakaia at the weekend say she'll be remembered for her beautiful smile. 22-year-old Renee Duckmanton's badly burned body was found on Main Rakaia Road shortly before 8 o'clock on Sunday. Police cordoned off her Cashmere home today and maintained their presence at Ms Duckmanton's mother's home. Our reporter Sally Murphy has been covering the case. And Sally, I think you've just left a police media conference, have you?
Yes, yep.
And what's the latest?
Well, Detective Inspector Daryl Sweeney says that info they received today has led them to believe that the last possible sighting of Renee was in Christchurch between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock on Saturday night. And they say she was last seen in the Manchester Street, Petersborough Street area. And for those who don't know Christchurch, that is where the sex workers usually operate from. They say that they want to hear from anyone, sex workers, the public, or any of clients in the area who may have seen her. Even if it was for a split second, they want them to come forward because any little piece of information will help. They say that they can't rule out her role in the sex industry as a factor in her death, and it's unclear whether a client was involved.
Okay, Sally, this is very sensitive because obviously Renee is a deeply loved family member, and this is an absolutely tragic case. But if she was working as a sex worker on Saturday night, that is material, and it's now the police's sense that the last time she was seen was in an area where sex workers operate from, and she hasn't been seen since between 8 and 10 on Saturday night in that area?
That's right. They say that because of the nature of this case, they will increase their presence on Manchester Street tonight. They've been in contact with the local prostitutes collective here, and they've spoken to some more sex workers along Manchester Street today, and they say that they will be increasing their presence over the next few days while their investigations continue.
Obviously, Sally, we both know that part of town. It's really in the centre of Christchurch. I imagine there are security cameras there, street cameras. There would be that kind of thing, presumably?
Yes, well, Detective Inspector Daryl Sweeney says that they are looking at CCTV footage from the area, but he would not say if they've seen anything suspicious or if they've noticed any sightings of Renee on that footage just as yet.
Thank you so much, Sally. That's the latest news. Sally Murphy reporting on the disappearance of 22-year-old Renee Duckmanton. So last seen in the centre of Christchurch between 8 and 10 on Saturday night. Anyone with any information about where Renee went after that time, please do contact Christchurch Police. It's 5:24, and Otago community's pioneering dream of putting up its own wind farm has been heavily challenged today by the people who live closest to it. This happened at the second day of a resource consent hearing for the Blueskin Energy Project in Dunedin. The project for 3 community-owned wind turbines on Porteous Hill above Blueskin Bay would be a New Zealand first, but it really has divided residents there. Our Otago reporter Ian Telfer filed this.
It sounded simple 10 years ago, the idea of putting up a wind farm to power the neighbourhood. But today, at the most critical stage, cold winds blew as local residents lined up to oppose the plan. Kirsty Clayton lives only 650 metres from the closest turbine site. She's worried it might be the end of her peaceful rural lifestyle.
Well, marketed as a small-scale community energy generation project, we consider that a group of turbines over 90 metres tall and with a few hundred metres of nearby homes is not small-scale on any normal meaning of those words. Mr Sycamore's observation that, irrespective of one's view, the structure will not occupy the site in perpetuity is of little consolation to us. 15 to 30 years or longer is a very long time.
The residents said the project would have a massive impact on their views, and they fear night noise and many bird deaths. So they brought in their lawyers, a bird expert and 4 landscape architects. One, Jeremy Head, said wind turbines are ungainly, spiky things that could never be suitable so close to country houses.
It's an overscaled, unusual addition to what I consider an intact rural landscape. The turbines would appear ambiguous, and in my opinion, the landscape is currently coherent and it maintains the anticipated rural character very well.
The questions came thick and fast. Is it a community-driven project or a project that's outgrown its community? A pioneering exemplar for the country being taken down by not in my backyard sentiments, or a pointless political statement by a fringe group? A resident, Andy Barrett, says he opposes the plan with a heavy heart because he supports the project trust and its aims, but it's a case of a wrong deed for the right reasons.
We have a project with few proven benefits. The site is, by the applicant's own admission, not optimal in terms of its wind resource. The proposal has divided the community and it will cause real and lasting disruption to the lives of the unfortunate people who would have the windmills on their doorstep.
The 140 written submissions were evenly for and against, and the project has supporters near and far. But today the positive comments were brief and mainly from people who don't live in the area. They said locally owned wind farms are common in Europe and hold the key to energy generation. One resident, Jen Rogers, says to her the plan's exciting.
I live in Waitati and I'm quite excited about this project. Even the fact of being able to see it from my place, and that's because I think it's a physical representation of a community doing something to be resilient. You know, they're thinking about the future.
The project team told the hearing the plan's innovative because as well as powering the area's 1,000 homes, it'll make $100,000 a year for local projects. They say it's an example of what communities can do to respond to climate change. But first, they'll have to respond to serious opposition from within their own community. At the Dunedin Town Hall for Checkpoint, Ian Telfer.
Right, when was the last time you went out to the movies rather than watching something at home on the telly or Sky or Netflix or Lightbox or something else I haven't even heard of? Reading Cinemas this week cut the price of tickets in a 4th theatre to $10 a ticket. They say the move was made for a variety of reasons, but it comes as the number of people signing up to online streaming sites skyrockets. Kate Pereira Garcia looks at whether traditional movie theatres can survive.
If video killed the radio star, then online streaming may be killing movie theatres. Reading Cinemas this week announced it was cutting the price of tickets in its Wellington cinema from $16 to just $10. That's on par with the chain cinemas in Auckland, Christchurch and Napier, and much cheaper than the national average ticket price of almost $17. Reading Cinemas did not respond to an interview request, but an independent theatre says business has been good recently.
Ricky Baker. He is a bad egg, a youth court regular. We're hoping that this change of scene will help straighten him out.
The Hunt for the Wilder People film certainly helped straighten out the local film industry. Simon Weary is the owner-operator of 3 Lighthouse cinemas in the Wellington region. He says things are good at the moment in part due to the popularity of the homegrown comedy.
You can't beat a big screen with big sound and a nice, bright, crisp image on screen. You just can't beat it. I mean, you can't beat it at home. You might be able to get the content a little bit quicker or whatever, but you still can't beat the cinematic experience. And you also can't beat the fact that it's a shared experience, that it's a collective experience, that it's a community experience.
The head of Internet New Zealand, Jordan Carter, says the cinema industry has to adapt to survive.
You look at the subscriber numbers for services like Netflix and so on, people have clearly got an appetite, and it's the convenience factor that's driving it. They can do it at home without having to go out. I see a place for both so long as the traditional approaches modernise and innovate.
And Wellingtonians seem to think the price drop will get people off the couch and in front of the big screen. Do you go to the cinema very often?
No, just a couple of times a year.
Do you think dropping the price will make any difference?
Yeah, probably a little bit.
Yeah, we go to the movies quite a lot, yeah. Well, I'm from Hawke's Bay, and it was already $10 in Hawke's Bay.
Is that why you go so often?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, not that often, but yeah, I do go, yeah.
Did you think you'll go more often if it's cheaper?
Probably not.
What is it that stops you going more often?
Too much going on, yeah. When there's good movies on, we normally go to the movies, so, you know.
Yeah, no, I just need to get DVDs out. Yeah, it's a bit easier to stay at home. Maybe it's my age, I don't know.
RNZ movie critic Dan Slevin says more moviegoers at the Courtenay Place Cinema will revitalise the mall.
The other thing to remember about this organisations like Reading is that they're popcorn retailers and real estate managers. As much as anything, they manage that mall and they want to get as much foot traffic through that mall as possible. They're losing a lot of their tenants downstairs, and so the cheaper their ticket prices, the more likely people will be going through that food court.
He says the real question is whether Reading Cinema will keep getting quick access to movies as film distributors' ticket sales percentages take a hit. Experts seem to agree there is a future for movie theatres, but it might look very different. For Checkpoint, Kate Pereira-Garcia.
Coming up, the World Health Organization says where has the worst air pollution in Oceania? Timaru. Go figure. The convicted murderer and sex offender Philip John Smith says his human rights have been breached after prison authorities stopped him from working behind bars. And NASA's super balloon launched from Wanaka yesterday. We have beautiful pictures of this if you're watching, but we'll describe them if you're listening, and has already made its way across the Tasman. But first, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The Finance Minister has put the Auckland Council on notice that the government will step in if it doesn't open up more land for development. And an independent panel is drafting a unitary plan for the city by July the 22nd, and the council will have 4 weeks to accept or reject it. Earlier today, the Labour Party said the government should scrap urban growth boundaries in Auckland. Bill English says now that Labour is on board with easing city limits, there's a parliamentary majority to override any decision made by the council, which he says has so far made poor decisions. A social housing advocate in New Plymouth says dozens of state houses lie vacant in the city, and he wants to know what Housing New Zealand plans to do with them. In 2008, 28 properties were demolished in the suburb of Marfell, and in 2012, 20 families were moved out to make way for redevelopment. Housing New Zealand says some are vacant because there's very little demand for them, and some would be uneconomic to upgrade. A Navy commander who groped a junior woman officer has been dismissed from the Defence Force. Philip Wigg was found guilty at a court-martial yesterday of indecently assaulting the woman at a social event at the Devonport Naval Base in 2012. At the sentencing hearing today, Judge Duncan Harvey said Wigg targeted the woman, preyed upon her, humiliated her and made her feel like an outsider among her own colleagues. Wellington City councillors have been barred from council staff areas after allegations of one councillor rummaging through papers and another giving staff a hard time. In an email shown to RNZ News, the Mayor, Celia Wade-Brown, says councillors now need to ask permission before speaking directly with officers and will not be able to access all parts of the building. The government has pledged more than $6.5 million to the major Canterbury irrigation scheme, Central Plains Water, to complete stage 2 of the scheme. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
Which is 26 minutes away. Look forward to it, Katrina. Thank you very much. Let's turn to business news now with Giles Beckford, who's just lifted his head up from sifting through the Panama Papers. How are you, Giles?
Oh, very well, thank you, John.
Can we talk
a little bit Panama'd out, I have to say, but it's we've been burrowing through. People may think, well, because we'd had just the splurge of stories last week, that was the end of it. But the small TVNZ and RNZ team has continued to work through we're sifting our way through, should we say, lines of inquiry, as the police would tell you. We're pursuing some suspects, and we're confident that there are more stories to come, but we'll bring them out when we've got them all together and we've got all the ducks lined up behind them.
Right, thank you, Giles. Let's talk about the Financial Markets Regulator, which had a warning for the KiwiSaver industry today, did it?
Well, yes, it comes off the back of a survey that the FMA has just done about investor confidence, whether people feel more confident, less confident in the investment sector, in the people that they deal with, in the finance industry in general. And now, not surprisingly, confidence was down amongst investors, and it covers really that sort of turbulent period we had at the beginning of the year when markets were tumbling a couple of 100 points in the day and then rebounding by 100. That month or so of volatility really unnerved people, and that's no surprise in that. But clearly, the FMA thinks that the finance industry here is still taking investors for granted, and in particular it's pointed the finger at KiwiSaver providers. It says that if you're just taking money from investors week in, week out from the pay packet, you'd really obliged to do more than just let the money accumulate and charge people for the supposed advice or just for what you're doing for them. And essentially it says you shouldn't be regarding investors as cash cows just to earn money from. I'd turn that on its head really and say, as well as the responsibility that the KiwiSaver providers have, is that investors need to take the initiative. And if you're likely to be in a KiwiSaver business for 20, 30 years, it's incumbent upon you to make sure that these people, A, don't actually abuse you by just taking money out of you for fees, but they're actually giving you good advice. They're telling you in times of turbulence, you should perhaps be a bit more defensive, or you're young enough to take a risk and have a bit of a growth slant to your portfolio. And this is really the message that the FMA is giving the industry, and I would say that investors as well.
Yeah, good point. What happened on the markets today, Giles? I haven't registered anything today.
Our top 50 index, it nudged up 8.6982 for the top 50. My prediction, it will clear 7,000 this week, and then somebody will come along and blow the froth off the market for a wee while. And the currency, Kiwi dollar, 67.9 US cents and 93.2 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor from Wellington. Thanks very much indeed, Giles. It's 23 minutes to 6. Christchurch's leading business group is criticising City Council plans to slow down its earthquake rebuild program. The Council's draft plan proposes the move as a way to reduce rates rises. It would also reduce the amount of money it needs to raise from asset sales, down from $750 million to $600 million, so knocking $150 million off. Here's our Christchurch local government reporter, Conan Young.
In its submission on the plan, the Employers' Chamber of Commerce says any reduction in momentum will lead to a loss of confidence among potential investors. Its chief executive, Peter Townsend, says the council needs to keep its foot firmly on the pedal.
We think this is a time for the council to be staunch, to be brave, to increase capacity if capacity is required to be increased to effect the rebuild in the context of their long-term plan. We don't want to see slippage against that plan.
Peter Townsend says the city is only halfway through rebuilding critical infrastructure and facilities, and the sooner that work is done, the better.
We also wanted to see the council realise more funds through the strategic sale of certain assets, and they are now backpedalling on that. We don't think that's a good idea because we think the council does have the capacity to keep a very, very firm hand on the tiller and to drive the city forward.
Peter Townsend also sits on the board of Otakaru, the government agency in charge of delivering the long overdue anchor projects. He denies it's hypocritical for him to be criticising the council for taking longer to deliver on its share of the rebuild.
It's my job to deliver projects that the Crown has responsibility for, and that's fine. And we will work constructively with the council as a Chamber of Commerce to see that our objectives are achieved. It's a completely separate issue, my governance with Otakaru.
But the head of another business group, Ernest Duval from the City Owners Rebuild entity, is pointing the finger at the anchor projects for slowing the momentum of the rebuild, not the council.
The big factors that are holding up rebuild in the city are in fact the anchor projects, in particular the convention centre, the East Frame Metro Sports Complex, the Performing Arts So you tally those up, you're talking billions of dollars worth of capital investment right in the centre of the city.
Ernest Duval says the council only has so much money to go around, and it makes sense for it to stage projects over a longer period.
It's now a question of how do we stage these projects so that we don't burden the current generation with too much debt and too many rate increases. So it's inevitable that these projects are going to be extended out into the future.
One Christchurch City councillor, Yanni Johansson, says part of the reason the council is having to cut its cloth is that it's been locked into a cost-sharing agreement with the government. He says that's forcing it to spend money on lavish central city projects at the expense of the rebuild of the wider city.
And if I give you an example, Victoria Street, which is proposed to be cost $8 million, that's roughly 4 years of footpath repairs in our suburbs. So for the sake of one project, we're foregoing 4 years of fixing our footpaths.
Meanwhile, the Keep Our Assets Canterbury spokesperson, Murray Horton, says investor uncertainty is just a smokescreen that's been invented by the Chamber of Commerce to put pressure on the council to stick with its original program of asset sales.
This whole thing is driven by politics and ideology, not by money. They believe that private ownership is good and public ownership is bad, full stop. And therefore the less of public ownership there is, the better.
The council has now finished consulting on its annual plan, which is due to be adopted by the end of June. In Christchurch, for Checkpoint, Conan Young.
Big cities are usually the ones blamed for air pollution. Beijing is an obvious example, but it's Timaru who has the unwanted title of worst air pollution in Oceania, according to figures by the World Health Organization. Damon Odie is the mayor for Timaru, and he joins us now. Damon, welcome. Where are you now?
Well, I've come up to Wellington for a bit of fresh air, John.
A bit of hot air too in Wellington,
yeah,
right?
I'm going to bottle some up and take it back.
Take it back down to Timaru. Well, what so? I mean, being number one in Oceania is quite exciting, but you don't want it in this. What's it about?
Oh, look, you've got to compare apples with apples, and it stands out, like when you read the headline, as with some industrialist, coal-driven, dirty old city. And as you know yourself, you've probably been through there. It's a beautiful part of the country.
Yeah.
But PM10 is made up of many things, including dust and airborne salt particles, and of course we're right on the side of the ocean there. So there's many factors, but we don't deny that private wood burners do contribute to that, and we are working very hard with the community.
Okay, I just want to back up the truck a bit there. So airborne salt particles, so when the southerly and the northerly would stir the salt up there, wouldn't they? Both would. So that's included in your reading, is it?
Yes, yep. So the particles can also come from vehicles, dust. We had an accident a couple of weeks ago, and it was actually a really windy day, so there was a lot of dust particles in the air.
You had an exceed. So you're actually measuring this all the time. When you say an exceed, exceeding what?
Exceedance. So we've got a target. We've got a test port in the town, the Environment Canterbury monitor, because our regional council look after air, not our local authority. And we've got a target to reduce those. So in 2014, we exceeded our allowance something like 45 times. Last year, we were down to about 22. So we're bringing it down. And that's the readings of PM10 particles in the air. So we're all working together to reduce that.
Okay, it's pretty dry in South Canterbury. So you got dust, you got salt, but you also do have wood burners. And my sense is that the old wood burners that people hold on to because they don't want to get flashy and spend money and show off and all that kind of stuff, they're the issue, are they?
Yeah, some of the very old ones also open fires, but you've also got to put that together with just education around burning dry wood. So some people leave it late in the season, so they buy wet wood or they stack it under a tree down the back. So there's a lot of things that contribute to it, not just the burners. So we're doing a lot of education in the community about how to use your fire properly.
And so you are talking to people, you are actually having these conversations in your community?
We've had a program running in conjunction with our regional council, ECAN, for the last several years.
And do people tell you to bugger off? Do they just want to they just want to burn whatever wood they want?
It's a bit of a right, isn't it, to crank the fire up? And we also do have an older demographic in our town, so we realise some people on fixed incomes just can't pull their log burner out and chuck a new one in. So there's a balance around making sure that they can do the best with the appliance they've got. And as they reach certain ages, look at phasing them out to new ultra-low emission burners.
Yeah. Thanks, Damon. It's good to talk to you. How's the economy there? How's the local economy? There's a mixture of farming around you, isn't there? Some dairy.
Some dairy, but very diverse. So, we've got obviously the meat works. We've got a couple of fishing company, Sanford's Tellies,
That's right.
and then right through to juice, salmon, carrots, all kinds of things going on. So we're cranking away nicely.
Good on you, Damon Odie, Timaru Mayor. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Damon. Nice to talk to you, Damon Odie, who has fled Timaru for the clearer air of Wellington, momentarily, of course. It is coming up to 5:45. The convicted murderer and sex offender, Philip John Smith, this is the guy who took off to, where was it, Edward? Brazil? Brazil, yeah. Says his human rights have been breached after prison authorities stopped him from working behind bars. Smith is awaiting trial on escaping from custody and committing passport offences after he flew to South America while on temporary release in November 2014. At the time, he was serving a life sentence for murdering the father of a boy he had sexually assaulted, as well as kidnapping and other charges. I've interviewed that boy and he was really traumatised by Smith being out and about. Today, he was back in the High Court in Auckland, appearing by audio-visual link and asking the court to order that he be reinstated to his job that saw him serving other prisoners food and collecting laundry. Our Auckland reporter Edward Gay was there, and as you've already heard, he is sitting beside me in the studio. Nice to see you, Edward. Why was he dismissed? What happened here?
Well, Philip John Smith told the court that he had a 20-year record working and there have been no incidents, and that work includes working in the public. He said he had worked on a marae, he'd worked at a public cemetery, he'd even while inside he'd administered an inmate sort of computer network, and he said that network had since been forensically investigated and found to have no contraband on it. He said that this decision to stop him from working was made months after what he called his alleged escape, and he said that the escape wasn't from prison. It was allegedly while he was out on release, and that basically the prison was trying to shut down any interaction he had with as much interaction with other prisoners and prison staff. He said that even with this work, he was locked up in his cell for 19 hours a day, and that was having an effect on his mental health and physical health.
Lawyers for the Attorney General say there's nothing unusual about being locked up that long. Is that the case, 19 hours a day?
Yeah, well, as Vicky McCall for Crown Law said, that's not unusual for maximum security prisoners. She said this was an operational decision made by the prison. It wasn't for the courts to decide. And she said that Philip John Smith could have gone to an ombudsman. He could have gone to a visiting justice, which is a JP, a justice of the peace, or a lawyer who's sent into prisons to sort of monitor and inspect prisons. He could have gone there first before bringing this case to court, but he's decided to go straight to court. And she said that this decision wasn't made arbitrarily. The prison authorities talked to the regional commissioner for prisons before making the call. She said that the prison can't have every single prison decision going to court, because obviously they make decisions all the time. And she said that this internal investigation into Smith's alleged escape found that he had manipulated prison staff, and that's one of the factors why he was stopped from working. And she said that working while inside prison was an opportunity and not an expectation. It wasn't a right. And Justice Edwards has reserved a decision.
Edward Gay, our court reporter, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate your time as always, Edward. It is 12 minutes to 6. Lots of feedback coming in, and we will bring you a sample of that shortly. Thank you all for contacting us. You can text 2101, you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, or you can contact us on our Facebook page or our Twitter account. NASA's super balloon has successfully crossed the Tasman and is beginning to make its way across Australia. This is a remarkable thing. It was launched yesterday from Wanaka Airport after 4 unsuccessful attempts thwarted by bad weather or leaks. The balloon is 18 million cubic feet in size and will float above the world for the next 98 days at just over 100,000 feet above the Earth. You can track its progress around the world on a map which shows where it is on real time now. NASA's mission manager, Janet Letchworth, joins us now. Hi, Janet. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Delighted to discuss balloons. It's been a heavy old day, so let's escape together. Where are you, Janet?
I'm still at the Wanaka Airport. It takes a few days. Well, for one, we're actively monitoring the balloon now and making sure everything's operating as we expected, and sure enough, it is.
Okay, let's...
Very happy.
Yeah, so you are happy. Tell me about progress so far. It left Wanaka yesterday. It is where? Somewhere above Australia now?
Actually, it just entered in south of Sydney, and it'll go over the Blue Mountain National Park, and then it will be north of Adelaide and cross back out into the ocean from there.
Wow. So what sort of speed is it going at?
Well, it will be completely off of the continent again by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Out of Australia?
Out of Australia completely. Mm-hmm.
So it's getting along at what kind of rate?
Well, what is our current velocity now?
No, this is good. Live with the latest, Janet.
It's probably over 50 nautical miles per hour. So.
Yeah. So okay. So what are you working on? What is the point of all of this?
Well, the scientist, the balloon itself is part of this mission's test objective. So the balloon itself, getting to the 100-day missions, is really going to be a game changer for the planetary and astrophysics research community, especially here in the lower latitudes. It's just an amazing thing to have a relatively inexpensive research platform that can stay for those durations over day and night. But on top of that, we've got the COSY telescope on board, and they're mapping a quarter of the sky with every pass, every nighttime pass, and they're looking for high-energy particles, asking those fundamental, where do stars come from, what's the galaxy made of type of questions.
The big questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
The big ones.
Very
okay,
big
so if you want to follow its progress and also see some of the images it's sending back, are you able to do that yet?
Certainly. On the website that I heard you mention,
yep.
We have some the footage from the camera. From the balloon itself, we don't have much of on the public. Those will be released probably on our Facebook page and intermittently. It just takes quite a bit of power to download those things, and so we don't actively stream those.
Now, Janet, I just saw some pictures. For people listening on the radio, there were some pictures of it taking off. It's a beautiful thing, as balloons so often are, but it did seem to me to have solar panels on the bottom. Is that? I know nothing about this stuff. So that's how it's powering the work it's doing.
Correct, and a lot of the majority of those panels were actually for the telescope itself, because the COSY team is getting all of their information downloaded real time, and so if in the event that we aren't able to recover their telescope, they'll still have their science data.
Wow, wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
As it floats up, looking kind of ethereal and wonderful and slightly mysterious, do you ever get calls saying, I've just seen a UFO? Does that ever happen?
Oh, yes, we get those sightings quite a bit. We expect through the night we'll get that, especially, because at sunrise and sunset,
it must be beautiful.
A lot of times it catches it and really catches people's attention. Also, we get a lot of aircraft concerned that they're going to intercept it, and the truth is it flies 3 to 4 times higher than most airplanes even can.
So it's somewhere up around 100,000 feet, is it?
Yeah, 110,000 feet.
Goodness gracious
me. 33.5 kilometers up.
Yeah, that's a long way up.
It's a long way up,
yeah.
but it's big enough that it it's deceiving. It looks like a smaller balloon at a lower altitude.
NASA Mission Manager Janet Letchworth, thank you very much indeed, and we will have that interview with the pictures up on our website shortly, because it is a rather beautiful thing. Wellington City councillors are being locked out of staff areas in the council's offices after allegations of a councillor rifling through papers and another of someone giving staff a hard time. Some councillors say it's in breach of their code of conduct, and the chief executive's now told them to ask permission before speaking directly with council officers. Now, other councillors are angry at being lumped in with those who break the rules and say the breaches need to be dealt with appropriately. Sounds like Gulliver's Travels. Our Wellington local government reporter Michael Kropp has the story.
Nearly a week ago, Wellington Mayor Celia Wade-Brown emailed her councillors telling them their contact with staff and access throughout the council building would be limited. She said that was in light of recent issues and the local body elections in October. But councillors say the rules are unprecedented and reflect the mayor's inability to lead the council. Councillor Paul Eagle says it's a draconian and gutless measure.
This was a passive-aggressive attempt by the mayor, where instead of punishing the individuals, she's punishing everyone. And unfortunately, I see this now as the chief executive using this as an opportunity to muzzle the elected membership.
RNZ News has heard from multiple councillors and staff members who believe a councillor has rifled through papers on a staff member's desk. RNZ has also received an email sent by Onslow Western Ward councillor Simon Wolfe criticising a staff member, saying he's lost confidence in staff and that their numerous mistakes should be treated as an employment issue. While that email was addressed to elected councillors and the chief executive, it was also sent to 4 staff members. Councillor Helen Ritchie says the email breaches the trust the council needs to work effectively and opens the door to a personal grievance.
I looked at it and thought, there are very serious implications with that. There are probably legal implications, and it is not appropriate, completely not appropriate for a councillor to act in that way.
Mr Wolfe says he did not know the email included staff members and says the mayor called him into her office because of it.
She said that I should be careful as to circulating emails of that nature. But she also was very clear that there was no code of conduct violation, and the CEO brought it up with me as well and thought there may be, but I had legal advice to say that there wasn't.
In this term, elected members have leaked confidential information to members of the public and to the media. Councillor Nicola Young says because the mayor and the chief executive effectively failed to deal with those breaches, there are no consequences for bad behaviour.
She's not dealing with it at all. We know there have been some breaches and nothing is being done about the councillors who are alleged to have misbehaved. Instead, we're all being disciplined, which is ridiculous. We need some leadership in Wellington, and that's why there are so many mayoral candidates for the elections. There's no leadership at the moment.
Mr Eagle says the mayor needs to be investigating the accusations of rifling, leaking and criticisms of staff. Celia Wade-Brown maintains she is dealing with those accusations appropriately. She says her office has not received any complaints about a councillor rummaging through a staff member's desk, but says she's had several councillors in her office for code of conduct issues since she became mayor in 2010.
My dealings with the individual members of the council are private. I don't leak conversations, and I would prefer that all of the elected members abided by the code of conduct. Thank you.
Did you deal with that member directly?
I am going into the meeting now.
Because this speaks directly to your leadership of the council. Did you deal with that member?
I think it speaks directly to the honesty of some of the council members.
The irony of an email reminding councillors about the code of conduct being leaked was not lost on anyone. For Checkpoint, Michael Kropp.
So much feedback coming in on housing. With the time coming up to 2 minutes to 6, we're going to try and give you some of it now. If you want to see that housing report, it is available on our website, rnz.co.nz. Just find the Checkpoint page and it is there. It's also available on our Facebook page. The guy that said empty houses in New Plymouth should have people in them should be made Prime Minister, says someone. Catherine says, what a load of rubbish that letter is. We went to Winds about emergency housing for my husband and our 3 children before we were evicted. They didn't want to help at all. They wanted us to come back when we had nowhere to go after we left our home. We were lucky, and a family member bought a house for us and his children, who we are now caring for, says Catherine. $190 per night is gouging. A lot of people have said that, and someone says, where is the money going? Well, it's going to a private hotel operator. So Winds pays the money. It's emergency housing. This is a private lodge, motel, hotels, lots of them involved in providing emergency housing in Auckland. Winds pays the money, and the person who is the Winds client, which is the word they use, repays Winds for it. $1,300 was the top rate we came across. That's $190 a night but other people we met were paying 160, 170 in that region. And bear in mind, they don't have the money for a private rental. They borrow the money from WINS to get into this emergency housing. Sorry, I might have missed it. Someone asking about that. Hi, John. If Housing New Zealand ignored its return on investment, ROI, on its vacant houses in New Plymouth, it could house the 35 local homeless families tomorrow morning and wipe out homelessness in their city by lunchtime. Ray Lilly sent that. I think Ray was chief reporter at Radio New Zealand when I started here. G'day, Ray. It's lovely to hear from you. And thank you for this report. So many people seem to think making a fortune on the back of the poor. It's close to usury to expect our poorest to go into debt to WINS for the most basic of emergency services or assistance. This needs an official investigation and a political cross-party commitment to some sort of fair resolution to our housing crisis. Thank you, Margaret, who urges us to keep on the case, and we will indeed do exactly that. We appreciate your feedback, all of it, and the report itself is available on our website. You're listening to RNZ National. It's coming up to 6 o'clock. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. It's wonderful to have you with us. Thank you for being here and thank you for your feedback. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, the Auckland Council have put on notice to free up more land for development. The unitary plan, does Auckland go up or out? What is the Council's response going to be? The Auckland landlords who tell us they're doing it tough, and health authorities warn an outbreak of measles is still spreading. All of that in the next 29.5 minutes. But first, the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Families borrowing more than $1,300 a week to live in Auckland motels say they have no other options. Yesterday, Checkpoint reported people are having to borrow money from work and income to stay in motels because there's nowhere else for them to sleep. Tuani Murray has been staying in an Auckland motel with her partner and son, who's in a wheelchair. She told Checkpoint she's paying just under $200 a night to stay there, but she doesn't know where they'll go when the WINS loans runs out.
Well, apparently we've been told that we are on a priority list now, but that's not to say that we'll be housed within the 2 weeks that we are staying here.
Tuani Murray says she won't be able to pay back the money. Work and Income says it works with clients on a case-by-case basis, but the cheapest motel isn't always the right one. The Auckland Council is on notice that the government will step in if it doesn't open up more land for development. The Finance Minister, Bill English, says now that the Labour Party is on board with easing city limits, there's a parliamentary majority to override any decision made by the Council. Earlier today, Labour said the government should scrap urban growth boundaries in Auckland and direct the Auckland Council to ease density controls. An independent panel is drafting a unitary plan for the city by July the 22nd, and the Council will then have 4 weeks to accept or reject it. Mr English says it needs to understand what it decides about planning rules has a national impact. The police in Canterbury believe the woman whose body was found on Sunday night was last seen in Christchurch City the previous night. Renee Duckmanton's badly burnt body was found on Main Rakaia Road. Sally Murphy reports.
At a news conference in the past hour, Detective Inspector Daryl Sweeney said the 22-year-old was last seen in the Manchester-Peterborough Street area between 8 and 10 o'clock on Saturday night. The police now believe her work in the sex industry may have been a factor in her death. Mr Sweeney says anyone who saw Miss Duckmanton on Saturday night should come forward. He says even if it was only for a second, any little piece of information helps. The police will raise their presence tonight on Manchester Street, where sex workers operate. In Christchurch, Sally Murphy.
A Navy commander who groped a junior female officer has been dismissed from the Defence Force. Philip Wigg was found guilty at a court-martial yesterday of indecently assaulting the woman at a social event at the Devonport Naval Base in 2012. At a sentencing hearing today, Judge Duncan Harvey told Wigg his actions were a gross failure of leadership.
You decided to target this young woman and you indecently assaulted her on at least 4 occasions. You preyed on her. You humiliated her. You made her feel like an outsider in the company of branch members, both subordinates and more senior officers.
Duncan Harvey told Wigg it would be intolerable for the Navy to retain his services. An Otago community's dream of putting up its own wind farm has been challenged by the people living closest to the site. A resource consent hearing for the Blueskin Energy project is underway. Our Otago reporter Ian Telfer has been there.
Today, 3 sets of residents on Pride Road, living just a few hundred metres from the wind farm site, spoke passionately about their fears, backed by lawyers, a bird expert and landscape architects. They said the project would have a massive impact on their lives, ruining their rural paradise with 90-metre towers, night noise and bird deaths. Others questioned the community and renewable energy benefits, the lack of a public business plan and the quality of the technical reports. There were half a dozen positive submissions from people saying the plan's exciting and holds the key to local energy generation, but only 2 were from the area. At the Dunedin Town Hall, Ian Telfer.
The convicted murderer and sex offender Philip John Smith will have to wait for a court decision to find out if he can go back to working inside prison. Smith is awaiting trial on charges of escaping from custody and committing passport offences when he flew to South America while on temporary release in November 2014. Edward Gay reports.
Appearing by audio-visual link from prison in Auckland today, Smith asked the High Court to order he be reinstated to his job, serving other prisoners food and collecting laundry. He said even with the work, he was spending 19 hours in his cell, and this was affecting his mental and physical health. The Crown Law lawyer, Vicky McCall, said working in prison was an opportunity, not a right. She said the decision to take Smith off work was made by prison authorities because he had manipulated staff when he escaped and could not be trusted. Justice Edwards has reserved her decision. This is Edward Gay.
To sport, and after an injury and forced layoff, the veteran Warriors forward Simon Mannering says he's more than ready to get back on the field. Having missed the last 2 matches after suffering a nasty facial injury, he's back for this weekend's NRL game against Canberra in New Plymouth.
I've enjoyed the season so far, and it's been up and down performance-wise, so that's definitely hurt things, but when you're away from the team, you're not used to it. It does really make you appreciate what you get to do each week.
Simon Mannering, the Warriors are hovering towards the bottom of the NRL ladder, 13th in the 16-team competition. The in-demand New Zealand supercar driver Scott McLaughlin admits he's torn between loyalty and opportunity as he weighs up his options for next season. McLaughlin says he's been approached by the Ford-aligned DJR team Penske. With Volvo's decision to cut ties with his current team, Gary Rogers Motorsport, he's been forced to consider his future before his contract expires at the end of the year. The former women's world tennis number 1, Maria Sharapova, will appear before an anti-doping panel in London tomorrow in connection with taking the banned drug meldonium. The 29-year-old Russian failed a doping test at the Australian Open in January. The International Tennis Federation panel could issue a 4-year ban, but 6 to 12 months seems more likely. That's the news.
The harsh reality.
I hope and wait every day that I'll get a text saying go and look at this process, but every day I don't. It's getting really hard.
The scale of the problem.
If you look at the total number of people in New Zealand who are in severe housing deprivation, to house all those people we would need about 20,000 dwellings.
Making space.
Other organisations saying they were going to close their doors, because they couldn't afford to keep running, and I got the funding for them to keep those doors open so that those beds are available.
Housing New Zealand. Guy Aspinall and Susie Ferguson morning report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, as ball season looms, what do parents need to know about supplying alcohol to teens and hosting parties where alcohol is present? And after 10, waste cooking with Austrian chef, activist and dumpster diver David Gross, who's on a mission to turn waste food into wonderful meals. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after morning report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Squally thunderstorms easing to showers. Northwest gales in exposed places tending westerly this afternoon. Waikato to Whanganui, including the Central High Country. Squally thunderstorms easing to isolated showers. Showers becoming frequent and heavier about the coast tomorrow afternoon. Manawatu to Wellington, including Wairarapa. Showers becoming isolated and clearing in Wellington and Wairarapa this afternoon. Severe northwest gales in the Tararua district from this evening through to tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, some showers this afternoon, mainly fine tomorrow. Severe northwest gales south of Napier from tonight to tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough and Nelson, showers clearing this afternoon, then mainly fine. Bulla to Fiordland, showers easing tomorrow afternoon, then clearing in Westland and Bulla. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, scattered showers about the south coast, clearing tomorrow afternoon, mainly fine elsewhere. And the Chatham Islands, rain developing tonight, easing to showers tomorrow. It's just gone 9 past 6.
Or 6 past 9, somewhere else.
Telling the time. Too hard.
Thank you, Katrina. Yes. Yes, there's 2 clocks up there. I wish we could show you our 2 clocks, but sometimes I get a bit confused as whether I'm going analogue or digital. Hence the confusion. Anyway, let's get on with it. The Finance Minister has come out swinging, saying the Auckland Council is on notice that central government expects it to open up more land for development. By golly, this is an ongoing saga. It's a position being strongly backed by Labour, giving the government a parliamentary majority to override any decision made by the council. An independent panel is drafting a unitary plan for Auckland to be in place by September. Now, if the rest of the country is sick of hearing about the unitary plan, actually it's really important because it will determine the density of the city, and therein lies a possible solution to the housing crisis. The plan will be delivered by July 2nd to the council, which will then have 4 weeks to accept it or reject it. Wellington are losing patience. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
The Labour Party says the government should scrap urban growth boundaries in Auckland and direct the city's council to ease density controls. Labour's housing spokesperson Phil Twyford says getting rid of the growth zones will put the kibosh on land bankers and speculators.
Instead of basically putting a boundary around the city and saying you can't grow beyond the boundary, we think a much more sensible way is to use more intensive spatial planning of the growth corridors.
He says land of special value or earmarked for future transport or infrastructure use could be set aside, like the Northern Coastal Strip or Pukekohe's Market Garden land. Phil Twyford says bonds should be used to raise money for infrastructure and the funds paid back through a targeted property rate.
Councils could borrow the money through bonds and then levy a targeted rate. An alternative is that a central government agency, infrastructure agency, could do it. So what happens right now is that the costs of the infrastructure, the development levies, end up on the price tag of a new home. The burden of infrastructure financing is a real risk to a lot of it's one of the reasons some developments go bust.
The ACT Party leader David Seymour is in a rare move backing Labour's ideas.
Well, I think the government should swallow their pride and accept that Phil Twyford is correct when he says we need to remove the rural-urban boundary and actually make it government policy and legislate on it as quickly as possible.
The government has been arguing for more flexibility around the city's sprawl, but in a statement, the Housing Minister Nick Smith says Labour is going a bit far in removing all city limits. He says rules are still needed to ensure new urban areas have appropriate infrastructure and services. However, his colleague, the Finance Minister Bill English, went further.
Well, we're saying that this is the kind of step that could be taken if it was necessary. Ideally, the Auckland Council makes its own decisions about its housing, and that they decide on a plan that will deliver enough houses.
Mr English says the council has so far made poor decisions.
The Auckland Council is on notice, and the fact that Labour and National can agree on what's in the past been a pretty controversial proposition is a strong signal to Auckland Council that central government could step in if it needs to.
A spokesperson for Auckland's mayor says he doesn't want to comment as the council is in a statutory process. The chair of the independent panel drafting Auckland's unitary plan, David Kirkpatrick, says it will not be swayed by political comments.
We're not closed off from the world, but we adopted as a principle at an early stage to have an evidence-based process. And so even though we're aware of some of the discussion and some of the proposals that are being put out there, they don't come into our deliberations.
The panel is due to recommend the plan to the council on July 22nd. If the council rejects any recommendation from the panel, it can be appealed in the Environment Court. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Demelza Leslie.
Earlier this evening, immediately after the 5 o'clock news, we looked at emergency housing for homeless people in Auckland. We met two families paying up to $190 a night, or as much as $1,330 a week for a motel room in Takanini. When people get desperate, they go to WINS and are placed temporarily in WINS-approved accommodation. The cost is regarded by WINS as a loan, and the families are required to pay the money back. But a lot of this accommodation, this emergency accommodation, could be very expensive, and the terrible irony is that if the people had any money, they wouldn't need the emergency accommodation in the first instance. You can now watch that report. It's on our Facebook page, our web page, and in our Twitter feed. But what about private rentals? Well, people often say that landlords in Auckland are ripping people off blind. Andrew Bruce is the president of the Auckland Property Investors Association, and he begs to differ. This morning in the pouring rain in South Auckland, he told me that most landlords aren't actually making great returns on rentals in Auckland at all, relative to the value of the houses. Speaking outside a private rental in Manurewa, I asked him about the property and if landlords were taking advantage of Auckland's housing crisis by charging really high rents to people who simply can't afford it.
It's $400,000 based on what's called an e-valuer. So that's a current valuation.
Okay, and what's that place being rented out for?
This is currently being rented out for $400 a week.
Okay, so on the face of it, $400 a week sounds like a lot, but in terms of the value of the house, it's quite a low return on investment for the landlord.
Yes, well, when you take into consideration all the costs associated with it, because obviously you've got to pay the rates, you've got to pay the insurance, there's repairs and maintenance, and there's all sorts of costs associated. So if I was to buy this at $400,000, and borrowing at today's rates, which are incredibly low at today's rates, I would have to be topping this up to the value of around about $90 to $100 a week.
So the sense that there are landlords profiteering cynically at the expense of low-income people, is that not the case at all? Are some people taking the mickey out there?
Look, I'm sure 90% of landlords own either one or two properties. 73% of landlords own one property. It's really a ma and pa business. You haven't got your big corporations in here. It's actually quite a labour-intensive business. Most people that are doing it are really in there for the long term, excluding the speculators, because obviously speculation comes in when markets do what they are at the moment.
So Andrew, what has to happen, do you think, to get people affordable rental properties in a situation where the market is just bolting away?
Well, it's reasonably well accepted that there's at least a 40,000 undersupply of houses at the moment. So we've really got to ask the question, why is there this undersupply? And there's been a lot of talk about the unitary plan and how the intensification and creating densities in and around transportation nodes. And to me that seems to make a lot of sense, because it's all very well creating extra houses, but we also have to do it where there's infrastructure, because you can't just build houses if there's no infrastructure. Now, back in the early 2000s, the council tried to promote something called livable communities, and that was particularly targeted in and around Panmure. And at the time, that basically got vehemently voted down because of the same sort of issues that we're going through at the moment with the current unitary plan. So to me, we're sort of coming full circle again, and the commissioners that have heard all these unitary planning hearings, they'll be coming up with a decision later on in February, in July. I think it's the 22nd of July. And depending on what their recommendations are, they then get voted upon by the councillors. So there's really some, I think, very important decisions that have to be made for the future of Auckland over the next couple of months, because I cannot believe that we can just keep on going trying to build freestanding houses. Because when you look at the statistics, In Auckland, we've got 21% of our houses are what we would call either apartments or high density. You look at a place, I think it was 24%. You look at somewhere like Sydney, that's 41%. And you look at somewhere like Los Angeles, that's in the 50s. So I think we've got to look at the options in and around higher density, which means the land value component of the overall property will be lower. So therefore that brings down the value of the overall property, making it more affordable for people. And I do realise these are tough decisions and they're not going to be popular decisions.
So the issue is, if housing is cheaper to build and to buy, if less money is spent on lands, and if there are more dwellings on land, then rents will go down too.
Yeah, look, if you've got a higher supply, it's going to be a market-driven thing. If we, instead of having a 40,000 undersupply of houses, if we had a 40,000 oversupply of houses, I'm sure that would have an impact upon rentals. Now, in terms of, I'm not sure if we're really going to be, the council are going to be able to do anything about the cost of building. Yes, there are some costs associated with some of the costs of doing business through the council. But to me, one of the big issues at the moment is really this density issue. And yes, if you could create this higher densities, and therefore it's probably more scalable than continually building individual houses, it will certainly assist in eating into this shortfall or this undersupply.
Andrew Bruce, President of the Auckland Property Investors Association, another person with a view on Auckland's unitary plan. Lots and lots of feedback on our housing story tonight. Up to $190 a night for emergency accommodation in Auckland. These are people who go to WINZ, they are desperate, some of them have been sleeping in cars. WINZ pays the money, but they have to repay it for emergency accommodation. $1,300 a week, one of the women we spoke to today is paying that. Report is available on our website. John, says this person whose name we're going to withhold. I'm a sickness benefit receiver. I've been unable to work for 3 years while I wait for an operation. I have the misfortune of dealing with WINZ. Their first option is always borrow money to pay for my son's school fees, school uniform, fuel costs to get to hospital. I refuse to go into debt as I'm unsure when I can work again. 9 out of 10 times after prolonged arguments, there's an allowance to cover costs. They often stop or cut payments without notice. I see the housing problems but believe that if WINZ workers did their jobs correctly, the situation wouldn't be so bad. I hate dealing with them. The ministry needs a complete shake-up. The culture of belittling and being obstructive needs to be broken. Housing is just one symptom of a government department that is very broken. It's strong feedback there. Hi, John. You can get a room at the Spencer on Byron for $180 and they're extremely comfortable one-bedroom suite. What on earth? Somebody is being greedy. Kind regards, Lucy. This person asks, how do Bill English and Nick Smith explain taking a dividend from Housing New Zealand for their investment when people are homeless? And one, the housing minister, and just on the subject of Timaru, Damon Odie is mayor, and someone said, hi John, what a breath of fresh air Damon Odie is. Straight talker, has some character, most of all seems to be a common sense, practical guy. Auckland could do with a mayor like that. Says Mike. Thank you for all of your feedback. 22.5 minutes past 6. Health authorities say an outbreak of the measles that began in Waikato is still spreading. Waikato now has 24 confirmed cases and another 7 possible cases. Northland has 4 confirmed cases and 1 unconfirmed, but those numbers are expected to grow in the next few days. Maya Burry reports.
In Northland, nearly 400 kilometres away from the initial measles outbreak, the district's health board says it's putting strategies in place to cope with a spike in requests for vaccinations and medical records. Its medical health officer, Claire Mills, says one person is believed to have caught the virus at a kapahaka festival in Waikato and then returned home. Dr Mills says she believes the contagious nature of the virus means Northland isn't in the clear yet.
There has been an infectious person in the community, and so it's likely that we will see some more new cases, and this is particularly likely in the mid-north. We're looking at supporting the general practices around the area to offer walk-in clinics, and we're also looking at setting up some other walk-in clinics over the weekend.
Since an outbreak of the measles in Waikato last month, one confirmed case has also been recorded in Nelson. The Nelson District Health Board says it believes one teenage girl was infected after visiting Hamilton. Back in Waikato, the region's Medical Officer of Health, Richard Wall, says he isn't surprised the virus has spread so quickly. He says there's still no indication when the spread is going to stop and people need to be vigilant.
It's really hard to predict what's going to happen, of course. The numbers aren't sort of rapidly increasing. Since early April, they've just kind of fairly slowly been going up, and that hasn't really changed very much at the moment. But depending on where people go when they're infectious, it could change rapidly.
Dr Wall says cases have been recorded at Morrinsville College and Fairfield College in Hamilton, with students who aren't vaccinated being told to stay away until next Monday. The principal of Fairfield College, Richard Crawford, says that means only people with proof of vaccination have been allowed through its gates this week, about a third of the 670-strong school population.
I've learned some significant lessons as a result of this event. Obviously, we've got to have better records of our students and the immunisation so we don't have to go through this if it should happen again.
Mr Crawford says he hopes it will be business as usual at the school by Monday. The Ministry of Health is advising all New Zealanders to check they are vaccinated against the virus. For Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
25 minutes past 6 on Checkpoint. Coming up in 5 minutes, therefore, on World Watch PM at 6:30 with John Greaves, a call for Hong Kong to be an independent country and the world's first binding accord on illegal fishing. It's coming up in 4 3/4 minutes. By the way, if you have ever worked on a fishing boat out of New Zealand ports, if it's a New Zealand fishing boat and you've worked on us and you want to contact us to discuss any dumping that you may have seen, we would love to hear from you. This is something we're working on. Please email us, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and we can protect your identity, obviously, if you'd like to contact us in those circumstances. Right, sexual abuse workers say they're worried it might take a long time for rural communities to see funding promised to help the sector stay afloat. Now, the government will put $46 million into support services for sexual abuse victims over the next 4 years, and $40 million of that is new funding. But where's it going and when will it get there? Mohammed Hassan reports.
At a press conference this morning, the head of the Help Prevention Clinic in Auckland's Mount Eden was fighting back tears. An hour earlier, Catherine McPhillips had been told the government was finally putting money aside for sexual abuse support. She says sexual abuse has been a dirty little secret in New Zealand, but things were changing.
It being very publicly funded by government, publicly able to be talked about, that's part of that social change which will make people feel like it's actually okay to put your hand up and go, actually, I'm a survivor, this happened to me. At the moment we live in a world which is quite hostile to that.
Catherine McPhillips says the sector has been in crisis for several years, although a $10 million injection by the government 2 years ago helped it just stay afloat. Still, it hasn't been enough.
A lot of parts of the country have had no access to a 24/7 telephone service or might have a very part-time call-out service. So, you were lucky if you went to the police on a Friday because, somebody could go with you and look after your well-being in that scenario. But bad luck if it was Monday to Thursday or something. So for services like us here, we have had a stable funding for a few years, but even we can't meet about 25% of the call-outs that we're called to, we can't get to.
The Minister for Social Development, Anne Tolley, says the money will help existing services as well as extend support to provincial areas which are currently cut off. But she says it will take a while to fully roll out.
We want to make sure that we have good professional staff. So that's why we've given ourselves a bit of time. Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, where we already have many of our agencies working already, will probably get the new service well ahead of the provincial services.
The spokesperson for the National Rape Crisis Centre, Andrea Black, says it's often most difficult to help rural communities, and she's worried the new funding won't get there fast enough.
Often our rural communities being able to provide safe services has been very tricky at times, and really holding the service and the workers in a safe environment we've done to some degree, but of course sometimes we have not been able to respond, and we know that the lack of response at times has caused people to make choices that are harmful.
Andrea Black says the funding announcement comes as relief, but the government needs to review how that money is allocated.
There are areas where our specialist services have been reduced or not been able to access that funding because they don't have MSD approval. In terms of building capacity, there's a long way to go yet, particularly from a kaupapa Māori perspective, and often there are no kaupapa Māori services or they're not funded.
The Miriam Centre is a grassroots counselling service covering large parts of Northland, and it gets around 5 or 6 new referrals every day. Its chief executive, Patsy Henderson-Watt, says she stays awake at night trying to figure out how she will pay her staff. She says the government needs to help those on the ground doing work, and not just the big organisations.
They know who's doing the work, they know who's performing. It wouldn't take long to get the money to us. It's a hard role, working at the sharp end of all of this. I could employ 3 or 4 more skilled therapists, social work therapists, real people tomorrow. We've done it without money, but I don't know how long we can keep going, you know.
She says sexual abuse services are overloaded and under a lot of pressure, and the government needs to start thinking about long-term funding that will bring much-needed stability to the sector. For Checkpoint, Mohammed Hassan.
Thanks, Mohammed. Lots of people contacting us about accommodation. Clinton, $150 he's renting out a room for in Dunedin, $1,300 emergency housing in Auckland. Someone says they're going on holiday in Wanaka for a week, a ski house, $1,500 for the week. And someone else is servicing a mortgage at $500 a fortnight. Thank you for all your feedback. We'll be back tomorrow night at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Families borrowing more than $1,300 a week from work and income to live in Auckland motels say they have no other options. The Auckland Council is on notice from the Finance Minister that the government will step in if it doesn't open up more land for development. The police believe the woman whose body was found near Rakaia on Sunday was last seen in Christchurch City the previous night in an area where sex workers gather. Hillary Clinton has won the latest Democratic primary in the American state of Kentucky by a very slim margin from Senator Bernie Sanders, who has, however, taken Oregon. And a Navy commander has been dismissed from the Defence Force for groping a junior woman officer. Our next news and weather is at 7.